Well, hi everyone, Dr. J here, and in this video we're going to wrap up our discussion of loading and performance for UAVs. And again, just a reminder, some of these things are going to be applying to fixed-wing aircraft, some are going to apply to both fixed wings and copters. And again, the FAA doesn't distinguish on the Part 107 exam. There's no separate exam for just quadcopters versus fixed wing, so you need to understand both sorts of information. Now, let's say that you go out and you buy a drone, and the drone manufacturer has a little bit of text on the drone package which says you should be able to fly for 30 minutes on one full charged battery. But you take it outside and you try to fly and you're only able to get 20 minutes. This is because of different factors that can affect the performance of the drone. And we're going to talk about several factors in this talk. One is the center of gravity and how that's related to the center of lift and the other forces acting on the aircraft. But then you also have the altitude where you're flying, the temperature, humidity, and the weight. And weight in particular is going to be important for drones which have interchangeable payloads. In fact, both the center of gravity and the weight issues are going to be related to drones where you can change out the payload, where you can change the actual weight of the drone by putting different types of cameras or different types of sensors on those drones. Some drones obviously only have one camera or one type of sensor, and so then that doesn't get changed, and so the center of gravity and the weight stays the same. But some drones, for example, the DJI Matrice 350, allow you to use different payloads, and that's where this weight and center of gravity thing becomes important. So let's talk about the center of gravity in a little bit more detail. So we have our center of lift, which is, of course, provided by our wings. Our wings are providing lift. We also have an elevator, the tail wing, and that is going to be providing either up-directed lift or downward-directed lift, depending on where the center of gravity is. And then, of course, we have the center of gravity, which is the balance point of the aircraft. And the arm is the distance between the center of lift and the center of gravity, and the moment is that lift force multiplied by the arm. So there's some torque or moment applied to the aircraft based on where the center of gravity is located and the center of lift. And this is critical because if we exceed the limits of the aircraft, so every aircraft will have some range where the center of gravity is able to be placed on the aircraft. And again, thinking about changing out payloads and how that's affecting the center of gravity. There's going to be a certain range or a certain area where you can move that center of gravity around and it's going to be fine. But if you exceed that limit, the drone is going to become immediately unstable and crash as soon as it takes off. And this is what we want to try to avoid. So in order to understand this, let's draw some forces acting on the aircraft. So again, we have our center of lift. We have our center of gravity, and that's going to be somewhere. I'm going to draw it in front of the lift for the moment. And then we also have, again, our elevator, which is going to be able to provide either negative lift or positive lift, depending on what is needed. It's going to adjust depending on where that center of gravity is. And you can see here on the right some different situations where you might get a negative versus a positive lift on that elevator. The closer the center of gravity is to the center of lift, the less downward lift is required. Obviously, you can see that here. Here, if this center of gravity and center of lift were exactly on top of each other, you wouldn't want any downward lift or upward lift on that elevator. Now let's look at the extreme cases where we might have the center of gravity either too far forward or too far back relative to our center of lift. And again, keep in mind, your center of lift is probably not going to change because your aircraft it's there, it is what it is. But by adding or removing payloads, you can change the center of gravity. And so that's what's going to be moving. Now, if our center of gravity is too far forward, we'll have a nose down moment. It's going to be hard to lift that nose up. And that's going to make it difficult to take off and land. You're going to have a decreased range because you need more tail down force. You're basically going to have to expend more energy to keep the plane moving upwards. You're going to have an easier stall recovery because, again, by lowering the nose of the aircraft, you can pull out of a stall. And you'll have a higher stall speed. Now for the center of gravity too far aft, and aft means backwards towards the rear of the aircraft, this is going to be particularly problematic for stalling because this is a nose up moment. And of course, the stalling aspect is that you want to lower the nose of the aircraft if you're in a stall or trying to recover from a stall. And that's going to be much harder if our center of gravity is too far back. Right, you can imagine this. If this is a seesaw and our center of gravity is our center of gravity, and the lift is trying to pull the nose of the plane up. And so this means we're going to need a lot of nose down lift, a lot of upward lift from our elevator, our rear wing of the aircraft. And there might not be enough at low airspeed to get the nose down for recovery. So this is going to mean that you're going to have decreased stability. However, it is a benefit to keep the center of gravity as far back as you can, because that's going to make it easier to take off. And then it's going to give you a higher cruise speed and a lower stall speed. So we have the center of gravity, the center lift, and the elevator lift. What's going to happen if we exceed our center of gravity limits? Well, if we exceed the center of gravity limit too far forward, the airplane is just simply not going to take off. You'll try to get it off the ground, and the nose is just going to stay down. The gravity is pulling the nose of the aircraft down too strongly for it to get off the ground. If we have a center of gravity which is too far aft or too far towards the rear of the aircraft is going to stall as soon as it takes off. Basically, the nose of the aircraft is going to pop right up, and we're going to have insufficient elevator force to bring that nose down. And so the aircraft is just going to stall immediately and crash. For a copter, what is the situation going to be? So you always want to make sure that your weight and balance are in limit, of course. But what about a quadcopter? How is this going to be affecting? Well, think about a quadcopter, and I'll again use my pen here on the screen. Okay, here's my very simple schematic of a quadcopter with 4 propellers. And so imagine we have our center of lift is maybe our average center of lift is right here in the center, because we've got these 4 propellers out equally spaced from the middle. And now let's say we add a camera to our drone, and the camera is sitting out here. And there's my camera. Now the camera is, as you can see, off to the side, and the question is going to be if that camera changes our center of gravity such that there's going to be some region around the drone where this is the allowable limits of our center of gravity change. So as long as our center of gravity stays within this blue region, and this region might be smaller, it might be larger, that's going to depend on the design of the drone, how well the drone was engineered to allow for center of gravity changing around. But you can see our camera's way out here, and let's say that this puts our center of gravity also right there at that spot. In that case, as soon as the drone takes off, if that center of gravity, in fact, I'll use a different color here to say, let's say yellow. If our center of gravity is outside of this blue region of safe center of gravity area, then the drone is going to tip as soon as it takes off, and it's going to crash. So even though a quadcopter might be more stable than a fixed-wing aircraft, it's still going to have center of gravity limits, which if you exceed those limits, it's going to make the drone tip as soon as it takes off and then crash. What are some other factors affecting the performance of your drone? So obviously you need the center of gravity to be within that range of acceptable center of gravity limits. There's other factors that affect the overall performance of your drone, and one of the most important is altitude. So here's how you should think about this. Altitude means lower air pressure, less lift, and those 2 things together equal lower performance. What do I mean? Well, as you go up in elevation, the air density becomes less. So everybody knows if you try to run a race and you're at the very high elevation, then it's more difficult because you have less air, less oxygen to breathe in and get energy. Your controls become mushy and less responsive for the same reason, where you just simply have less air at higher altitude, and so you have lower performance. Temperature also affects performance because of the same reason. Higher air temperature equals a lower air density, right? So as the temperature increases, the density of the air decreases. That's basic chemistry. And then you have less air density, you have lower air pressure, and hence lower performance. So if you've had a basic chemistry or physics class, this should all make good sense. Lower temperatures actually increase performance until you get really cold. So if you get below freezing, batteries tend to have a decreased life, and you may have mechanical problems actually below freezing, because there may be parts of the drone that actually freeze up and stop working. So drone performance will increase until you start to get down to this freezing level, and then it can depend on your drone and how well it was designed. Humidity also affects performance, and this is because humidity actually takes up volume in the air, and is less dense. Water vapor is less dense than other types of air molecules or other types of gases in the air. And so this results in, again, decreased air density and lower air pressure and reduced performance. And so humidity also affects the mechanical performance of the drone because most electronics don't do well with moisture. So a hot, humid summer day is going to result in very poor performance of your drone, whereas a cool, dry day is going to be an ideal day to fly your drone in terms of its performance. Now, you can certainly fly on a hot, humid day as long as you're meeting all the other regulations, but just understand that you're not going to get that battery performance that the manufacturer says, for example, on that hot, humid day. Now, weight, this one should be obvious. Heavier aircraft is going to require more energy to get off the ground. It's going to require more energy to stay in the air. More lift is required. You have to get to a faster speed, so on and so forth. And so all of this means that weight results in reduced climb speed, reduced maneuverability, decreased battery life. All those things are going to affect the performance of the drone. Takeoff distance, if you're using a fixed-wing aircraft, same thing with quadcopters. They are going to also be affected by weight in the same way that a fixed wing will. All right, so that's it for loading and performance, and I will see you in the next video.